Thank you so much for joining Sharebirds, the Essential Go-to-Market Show, tips and strategies, where we offer short video content and interview-style conversations with global product marketing leaders. I'm your host, Yasmin Tarehi. Now, whether you're an early-stage company or a public company, almost everyone struggles with the same question. What does it take to have a successful product launch? Today, I'll be talking to Susan Park. She's the head of product marketing at VR Work Experiences at Oculus, where she leads a team of product marketers focused on enabling platform features and experiences to make work possible in virtual reality, which all of us need right now. So I'm super excited to welcome Susan to the show. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, nice to meet you. And please call me Spark. Everybody calls me Spark, and
Apologies.
I actually prefer it. We're Spark level. We can Spark. Yes.
Spark, so can you tell me, what are some of your top takeaways and learnings on the go-to-market process? And you now work at Oculus, but you also worked at Spotify and other companies. So I'm sure that there's probably a lot of major takeaways that you've had over your tenure. Can you tell us about them?
Definitely. Every product is different, but it always comes down to your target audience and how that product resonates with that audience. If you can just keep it very simple in those measures in a lot of ways, you can really make sure you're future-proofing your go-to-market and using the best assets that you have, depending on the company or the team or even the product marketing leader that you have. Because what you're trying to do at the end of the day is get a good product to the right people and drive usage. So thinking about that, I always try to take a step back, think very concretely about the audience and what the product is trying to do for that audience, and then build the go-to-market from there.
Awesome. And can you give us an example of maybe the ways that you've done that at Oculus?
Sure. So my time at Oculus is pretty new. I've been there for 5 weeks and it's been a lot of work, but it's pretty amazing to see how we're taking a product in use cases that people don't even understand yet. Like, we're really going from negative to zero in certain ways because people don't even know what they need yet in some of these areas. But what I can say, in a lot of my other jobs, especially at places like Spotify, the core for a lot of this was creating bedrocks and user research and understanding what the behaviors are and what we want to drive and what problems we want to solve for this audience. So going back in time, when I think about one of my most successful launches, which was a Spotify video ads product, was we really had to start with how are we going to introduce video onto the Spotify platform and introduce it as an advertising function into this audience in a very beloved space and a very personal space. How do we do that without alienating our audience and making sure that they create some sort of utility or enjoyment out of this? So we did massive consumer research studies to really try and understand what the audience valued and what they wanted to trade instead of their time listening to video advertisements. So we went through this process and we came up with a rewarded video ad format that worked really well and very natively for Spotify at the time. And it worked very well from inception in terms of user behavior response. Things change over time, the product changed over time, but understanding that audience, what could resonate with them, what we could use to make sure that we weren't driving churn out of the product was really important. So if you skip that in any way, you will not be able to position or understand how to drive adoption or the real goals of your product. And that kind of also leads me to one of the uber best takeaways ever, is that a lot of times we get pigeonholed into thinking about the audience and the product. Well, we forget about goal setting. What are the goals that we want to drive? What is realistic? What do we want this product to do in the first 30 to 90 days so that we can really diagnose if anything is going wrong and make changes iteratively as soon as we can if anything is going wrong. Hopefully things are going well based upon these goals, but if things are going wrong, that's when also you have to move into action even faster.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. I have so many questions to ask you about the Spotify product suite, but it's a whole other show because they just launched, I think it was like podcast playlists.
Yes. And Facebook just launched audio. There's a lot going on in this tech space, which is why product marketing is so necessary. There's always changes going on in these product areas. And in every company I've been in, whether it's Google, Spotify, or even here at Facebook and at Oculus, really understanding the audience and the use case that you're trying to drive is it sounds so simple, but once you get in the weeds of all of this user research and all of the go-to-markets, the tactics, the marketing plan, all of that, sometimes you can lose sight of that. And it's really important that you're asking the bigger questions constantly through the process to make sure that you are lining up all the right things to just drive that change with the audience and to make that product resonate with that audience really well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Spark, can you tell us about team structure? How do you think about working with other teams to get your launch ready? And I think it's so interesting, like personality is also really important when it comes to being able to influence people within an organization. So, can you talk to me about that? Like, what's your process for like working with different stakeholders and influencing people?
Well, I always like to quote one of the most famous people I've ever worked for, and also one of my mentors. His name is John Steinbeck. He runs marketing for DeepMind now, but he would always say that product marketing trades on influence. And I think that's 1,000% true. So we sit in a variety of different organizations. No one can really quite understand if we sit in product or we sit in marketing. And we, and a lot of times, own business metrics that cross multiple areas. And we have a lot of dot line relationships and not direct reporting lines. So I think in a lot of ways we have the type of person who needs to be successful in these types of roles are people who are comfortable with ambiguity and who know how to trade in influence and not just in hierarchical authority. So when I think about staffing my team, I always like to think about staffing it with product marketers who understand how to influence into a direction based upon core skills that we interview for. Some of them are working with data. Some of them is just how they would work with the team, how they handle conflict, and then how they would move a project forward. And then last but not least, they'll have a case study to see if they can bring that all together and then handle basically a battering line of questions to see how they can be pushed through. So I think starting with a strong product marketer is always the best way to go, who understands that their trade is influence, not necessarily owning everything. Their job is to make sure everything gets done, but it's not their job to do everything. So then once you kind of stack that and then come up with a bare bones go to market in terms of, again, who's your audience and who do you want to reach and how that product is going to affect that, then you can kind of stack out who you need to work with across marketing, comms, product, XYZ to make this most effective. And sometimes you don't need that big of a cross-functional group. If it's just a feature, if it's just something small, you might not need a lot, but aligning up, I think, making sure you staff with someone who can make these calls and pull in an influential go-to-market, depending upon the size that you need, is really the core to start with. And that's where I think about hiring and how I think about hiring.
Yeah, that's such an important point. And I think now more so than ever, because we're all mostly remote. I don't know if some companies are going back, but I think being able to influence remotely too is like its own set of challenges. So I think that's so key.
Totally. I actually did a podcast with Marcus, another Sharebird podcast, around global/remote working at the beginning of COVID, because I've worked globally and in a separate office for my product team in all my times at Google, Facebook, Spotify, and even Oculus. This is one of the first times where I'll have some of my product teams or one person who I support actually in London with me, which will be a nice, refreshing change. But there's a lot of practices that you can do to establish your personality and your voice in so many different ways versus just meeting in person that we go into a little bit in depth in that podcast. So I hate to toot my own horn, but at least toot Marcus's podcast, because he's got a lot of good tips and tricks out there too. And we spent a half an hour talking about this.
Awesome. We'll include that show as well in the notes. So I want to listen to it. Awesome.
And hopefully it was okay.
I'm sure it was great. So Spark, can you tell us what are some of the things on your go-to-market checklist? Like what are the things that you track before going into a launch?
I love this, especially because this has evolved from when I was running my own launches myself to now I'm basically coaching and empowering product marketers to do this. So in the past, I would have given you a checklist, a really strong checklist, the responsible, accountable, consultant, informed decisions all booked through. But as I've evolved in my career, I've realized that it's really important that each product marketer starts from a template probably, but comes up with their own based upon this product area and what they need to drive, which is what they're adding their special sauce to it. So what I've evolved this to is to making sure that I ask the people on my team some core questions. So the core questions are, who's your audience? I bet you could have guessed that. What is the main value proposition or main messages for this audience that this product will satiate? Is the product ready to deliver on these messaging points that you're landing? product readiness is huge. And then as you build out the go-to-market, how are you reaching that audience? How are you going to measure success that you're reaching this audience and how the product is working? And then how are you ensuring that all of the other stakeholders and teams that you've lined up in this are going to be able to deliver on time? And you're keeping track of that. So there's 6 questions in there, but these are the questions I constantly re-ask my team in the process to see if they feel like their GTM checklist is complete. Because if it covers most of these areas, you probably have a decent proposition and a go-to-market checklist that you're going through. If you're missing one of these key areas, we will do a deep dive and see, especially on the deliverable. And that's usually where I'll swoop in and help, is if it's mostly on the deliverable sides at that point, if this is all built out.
Nice. Yeah, those are really important questions. So thank you for that, Spark. So any last takeaways, anything that you want to tell people maybe who are working on a launch for their first time, or maybe an aspiring product marketer? Like, do you have any main takeaways or your final takeaway?
It really comes down to, again, the plan that you're building to reach this audience and how this product's going to resonate with them. Like, you're combining 2 things in one, which is not just thinking about an audience and what they like, but how this product will resonate with them and drive things forward. And it is also your responsibility to make sure that that is landing and that it's performing the way it is, and understanding why or why not. If you don't understand these whys, you could actually end up making a lot of uninformed decisions because you could be making assumptions based on other things. So please just really focus on those core tenets, and the rest will follow if you keep things simple. For example, at Oculus right now, we are dealing with a lot of unknowns, right? Especially in work productivity. So on Oculus and in some of these more nascent areas, we've actually had to think a lot about goals around understanding an audience versus just driving product adoption. And that's also kind of when we're thinking about things very nascently at Spotify and even at Google, when we're trying to go into a whole new area, we had to think about goals, about understanding what a user wants versus diving into, oh, how do I drive growth? How do I drive adoption? Because we understood all of that. Once we moved into launch and adoption, we could diagnose why things were growing or why they weren't much better. So we could design a tighter activation plan, further along things, driving growth, promoting things. And we were more confident around all of those decisions because we really understood the why. So that would be my last very long set of advice.
That's great. Yeah. Simon Sinek talks about the start with why. And I think that's such an important and powerful question that a lot of people don't ask, or oftentimes if I ask why, people often answer with what. So yeah, it's a really powerful question.
Exactly. And the last thing you want to do is start promoting a product or pushing it out to market too soon when you don't know why it's growing.
Exactly.
And there's so many companies who staff entire growth organizations to understand the why of their funnel because of these things. So that's why so many product marketers are successful, I think, because they hone in on that and they can really drive the right levers for growth long term.
Right. Spark, this is so great. I'm so grateful for your time. And obviously this is a very short conversation. So if people want to learn more from you, where can they find you?
So LinkedIn is most likely the best way. I don't tweet, unfortunately. So that would be the best way to find me. And just look for Susan J. Park. I haven't gotten the Spark handle on LinkedIn yet, but
coming
feel
soon,
free
right?
to call me that. Yes,
Okay.
coming soon. That'll be an edit coming up.
Awesome. So Spark, thanks again for your time. And for those listening, you can stay tuned for upcoming shows with product marketing leaders from startups to public companies as they share some of their best tips and strategies on the go-to-market process. And please be sure to tag us, send us a note, tell us what you learn, tag Spark, tag me, tag Sharebird. And for those of you who are looking for more material on go-to-market, you can also check out my book, Product Marketing Debunked on Amazon, or one of my many articles on Medium, as well as a new book coming out. Details in the bio. Thanks.